Colin Firth, the love he never expected to find. What if the man the whole world fell in love with had never actually been loved the right way? Not really. Not fully. Not in the way that lets you breathe. That's the question sitting at the center of Colin Firth's life. And at 65 years old, he's finally given us an answer nobody saw coming. We're not talking about a Hollywood romance served up on a press tour. We're not talking about a carefully worded statement from a publicist. We're talking about a man who spent decades hiding behind perfect composure, perfect roles, and a perfectly pressed suit, finally admitting what love actually cost him, and what it actually looks like when you stop performing it. So let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand where Colin Firth is now, you have to understand where he came from. Colin Andrew Firth was born on September 10, 1960, in Greyshot, Hampshire, England. His father lectured in history. His mother was a scholar of comparative religion. Dinner at the Firth household wasn't exactly a place where you talked about your feelings. It was a place where you analyzed them, turned them over like philosophical puzzles, examined them from a safe intellectual distance, and then moved on. Young Colin felt everything deeply. He just had absolutely no language for it, so he found acting. And acting gave him the greatest gift and the most complicated curse all at once. A way to feel things publicly, while keeping his real self completely hidden. He trained at the Drama Centre, London. He wasn't the most naturally gifted person in the room, and he knew it. But he had something that couldn't be taught. This extraordinary ability to show pain without a single word. Just stillness. Just weight behind the eyes. It wasn't something he learned in class. It was something he had practiced his entire childhood, living in a house where emotion was a topic for debate, rather than a thing you were allowed to actually feel. Now, 1995. That's where everything changes. Colin steps into a lake in Derbyshire, in a white linen shirt, emerges completely soaked, and within about 48 hours becomes the most desired man in Britain. The BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice turned Mr. Darcy into a cultural phenomenon, and Colin Firth into the face of a very specific kind of masculinity. Brooding, restrained, deeply feeling, but completely unable to say so. Women wanted him. Men felt vaguely threatened by him. And the whole world decided that this character, this emotionally repressed romantic hero, was actually the real Colin Firth. Here's the trap. The world fell in love with a man who doesn't speak his feelings, and then spent the next 30 years expecting Colin to be that man in real life too. And here's the thing that breaks your heart a little. For a long time, he obliged. But before Darcy, before the fame, before any of that, there was Meg Tilly. And this is the chapter most people skip, which is a mistake, because it might be the most honest thing Colin Firth ever did. They met in 1989 on the set of a period film shooting in France and Czechoslovakia. Meg Tilly was American-Canadian, a former ballerina who had grown up in genuine poverty in rural Canada. She'd been Oscar-nominated. She had a Golden Globe. She had 2 kids from a previous relationship. She was fully formed, fiercely independent, and completely real, in a way that Colin, raised to treat emotions like academic problems, had probably never encountered up close before. He was gone immediately. And here's what he did about it. He left London. He left his career. He moved to a wooden cabin deep in the woods outside Vancouver, British Columbia. No television, no agents calling, no red carpets, no Mr. Darcy. He helped raise Meg's 2 children. He chopped wood, he made dinner. He built a life with his hands. And their son Will was born in 1990. For 5 years, Colin Firth was not a rising British actor. He was just a man in love, doing the quiet, unglamorous work that love actually requires, in a place where absolutely nobody was watching. Meg has said that she and Colin both believed, while they were living it, that they were the love of each other's lives. That word, believed, carries so much in it. Past tense. The specific grief of something you were certain about, until you weren't. It ended in 1994. Not from one big dramatic moment, but from the slow erosion of 2 careers pulling in different directions. Colin went back to London. Within a year, he was Mr. Darcy. The man who had spent 5 years chopping wood in the Canadian wilderness became the most talked about actor in Britain overnight. He has never fully spoken about what it cost him to leave. But the fact that Meg Tilly, when Colin won his Golden Globe in 2010, posted a warm, joyful congratulation on her blog, talking about the whole family raising a glass to him, tells you everything about the kind of people they both are. Then came Livia Giugioli. Colin met her in 1996 on the set of a BBC miniseries filming in Italy. She was a production assistant. She was Italian, passionate, deeply committed to art and environmentalism. Someone who seemed entirely unimpressed by the celebrity machine that had just swallowed Colin whole. He was completely disarmed. Again, because that's the pattern, when you look at it clearly, Colin Firth is consistently drawn to women who are fully themselves, who don't need him at the center of their world. And every time he finds one, he makes himself smaller to fit around her. He taught himself Italian, not for a film role, for her, because he loved a woman from Italy and wanted to meet her in her own language. That detail alone tells you who this man is underneath the armor. They married in 1997. 2 sons, Luca and Matteo, a house in London, and a sprawling villa in Umbria that Livia transformed into an eco-conscious retreat. From the outside, it looked like exactly the life you'd want. Purposeful, grounded, a partnership with actual values behind it. What it looked like from the inside, nobody knew for a long time. In 2011, Colin stood at the Academy Awards podium and accepted the Oscar for Best Actor for The King's Speech, a film about a man who literally cannot speak, who has been silenced by trauma and expectation and shame, learning at last to open his mouth and tell the truth. The parallels were almost too on the nose. He was being applauded for playing a man who found his voice while still keeping his own completely locked away. Livia sat in the audience looking radiant. It looked like an arrival, like everything had been worth it. What nobody in that room could see was that behind the smile and the evening wear, something in the marriage was already quietly breaking. By 2015, Colin and Livia had separated, privately, without a single headline. They were trying to figure out if what they'd built could survive. During that separation, Livia reconnected with an Italian journalist named Marco Brancaccia, someone she'd known since childhood. A reconciliation between old friends became something more. When Colin and Livia got back together in 2016, she ended things with Marco. He was hurt. Messages were exchanged. Things got messy. When Colin and Livia reconciled, she told him the messages were threatening. Colin believed her. Of course he did. He was the man who stayed, the man who showed up, the man who held things together. In 2018, Italian media exploded with stalking charges. Livia had filed against Marco. Colin immediately released a public statement of support. He put his name on it, his reputation, his lawyers. He stood beside his wife completely and without hesitation, the way Mark Darcy would, the way he'd been doing his entire life. And then in 2019, Livia withdrew the charges, released a statement admitting the relationship had been consensual. Marco had the messages to prove it. The Italian press was brutal. The British tabloids quietly buried the update. But the damage was done, and it was total. Colin had been humiliated by the affair, and then humiliated again by being used as a weapon against a man who had done nothing wrong. He had offered his own name as a shield, and the person he was protecting had been lying. Everything he thought he knew about his marriage, about Livia's character, about what they'd built together, was now a question he couldn't answer. He went quiet. There was nowhere else to go. December 2019, they announced their separation. In 2020, as the world locked down, the divorce was finalized. Colin was alone in London. His sons were adults. The Italian villa was a legal negotiation. The man who had learned a whole language for love was starting over at 60, with nothing to hide inside and no character to play. And this is where Stanley Tucci becomes important. Not as a fun celebrity friendship detail, as something closer to a lifeline. Colin and Stanley had known each other since 2001, when they made a film together playing Nazi officials, keeping their composure while being complicit in something monstrous. The friendship that grew from that work was real, and quiet, and sustained across decades. When Stanley lost his first wife to cancer in 2009, Colin was there. Not in any way that made the papers. Just there, the way that actually counts. Now it was Stanley's turn. In 2020, lockdown London, Stanley called. Showed up, and the film they chose to make together, Supernova, became something more than a project. It became the place where Colin Firth finally let himself feel what he wasn't yet able to say in his own life. He played Sam, a man in a 20-year relationship watching his partner disappear into dementia, driving through the Lake District, revisiting all the places they loved, knowing it might be the last time. Sam is the buttoned-up one, the fixer, the one who keeps trying to save what cannot be saved. Watching Colin play that role in 2020, in the wreckage of everything he'd just lost, it's not entirely acting. He's borrowing the character's grief to try on some of his own. Then came The Staircase in 2022. Colin as Michael Peterson, a man whose entire public image of decency conceals something darker. The most deliberately counterintuitive casting of his career. He wanted to break the Darcy image, to play someone whose charm is the lie. It was uncomfortable. It was also necessary. The kind of work people do when they're trying to understand something about themselves that they can't quite reach directly. And on the set of The Staircase, Colin met Maggie Cohn. She was a writer and producer on the series. American, sharp, known for her work on American Crime Story and Narcos Mexico. A woman who had spent her career understanding exactly how people deceive themselves, how the story we tell about our lives quietly diverges from the life we're actually living. They were spotted in February 2022, walking through West London, deep in conversation, laughing, completely unguarded. Two people in their early 60s in the winter sunshine, looking, by every account, like people who had found something they hadn't expected to find. They went public in October 2022 at a film premiere in London. The photographs show two people standing close, not performing closeness, actually in it. Maggie Cohn doesn't know Colin from Mr. Darcy. She didn't fall for the wet shirt. She met a man in his 60s trying to figure out who he actually is, and she stayed. She can see behind the armor, and she doesn't appear to find what's there frightening. In a 2025 interview, Colin said something that landed completely differently from his usual careful, diplomatic answers. He said the love of your life is not always the person you spent the most time with, or the person you chose first, or the person you stood by when you probably should have walked away. Sometimes, it's what you find when you stop performing and start telling the truth. When you stop making yourself smaller to fit around someone else's vision and start actually inhabiting your own life. He didn't name Maggie. He didn't name Meg. He spoke, carefully, in the way of a man who has finally understood that silence isn't strength. It's just a more elegant way of hiding, about what it means to be known. Not recognized, not admired from a distance, actually known. At 65, Colin Firth is not the man in the wet shirt. He is not Mark Darcy, patient and uncomplicated and waiting forever. He is a man who gave everything to love, more than once, in more ways than most people ever risk, and wasn't always treated accordingly. Who moved to a cabin in Canada and lost years of his career and never once called it a mistake. Who stood up publicly for a lie because he couldn't bear to look at the truth. Who played broken men on screen while holding his own grief quietly off to the side, where no one could see it. And now, finally, something different. Not a performance, not a role, not a man making himself fit around someone else's story. Just Colin, in a flat cap, walking through London in the winter sunshine, finally, in his own life. That's the love he found. And honestly, it was worth waiting for. If this story moved you, and how could it not, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the most powerful reminder is simply this. It's never too late to stop hiding and start being found.